Good morning, everyone. Really delighted to be asked to speak today at this session. So thank you for taking your time to come and listen. Just very quickly, I'm going to quickly give you a background to myself when I can make the. There we go. So, well, a quick background to me and why I'm talking to you today. I spent about 15 years in well-known corporates in a marketing career and regional businesses. There's a number of them at the bottom of the screen there, on various sectors. But I'm probably most well known for having the joint venture partnership for Tiger Stores for Wales and Bristol, which I set up in 2013 with my business partner Helen, which we ran for 5 years. We went up to 8 stores, 5 million turnover, about 120 team members. And since then, I've worked as a business advisor, interim and part-time C-suite roles and mentoring. But I've been on a number of advisory boards, and I've got non-exec experience in social enterprise and the commercial and public sectors. Most recently, I've been appointed as a non-exec director of the Development Bank of Wales, and I'm also a non-exec director of Loopster, which is a fashion startup based out of Newport, and I'm also an advisor for the Alacrity Foundation for mentoring tech startups. So that's a very quick background to me. So there's a variety of businesses on the call today. You can see we've got quite a few manufacturing, we've got a startup, and we've got somebody who's a bit more established, which is great. And I hope you'll all be able to take something away. This is just kind of a list of what we'll cover. I'm just going to quickly skip through that because I want to make sure that we've got enough time to go through everything and have questions. So basically, what does the board do? According to the Institute of Directors standard for the board, a board key purpose is to ensure the company's prosperity by collectively directing the company's affairs while meeting the appropriate interests of its shareholders and relevant stakeholders. So in short, the board's accountable for business strategy, plans, processes which allow the firm to grow. And the actions they need to take are things like examining and summarising business performance on a regular basis, driving the creation of short-term and long-term strategy, not necessarily actually delivering that creation, but actually driving that creation, company governance. And for a small business or a startup founder, having a board allows you to work on the business and not just in it. So you've got other people to bounce your ideas off, people who have your business interests at heart. What responsibilities do board directors have? So as well as setting the business strategy and the plans and processes for the firm to grow, they've also got quite a lot of governance and legal responsibilities. So making sure that the annual accounts are created and are accurate and approved, making sure that all the Companies House information is kept up to date and Companies House get the information required. Whilst they might not physically do that, they're accountable for making sure that happens. Making sure that there's minutes of every board meeting, making sure that the company is legally compliant with laws regarding things like health and safety, recruitment and people, employment, that kind of thing, GDPR, etc. Making sure that all the HMRC liabilities are in place, are managed, like taxes, national insurance, VAT, etc. And making sure that the business stays free from conflict of interest or third-party benefits. Each director must be legally permitted to sit on the board. So if a director's ever previously been disqualified, they'll need legal permission from a court to sit on a board again. No director can be younger than 16, and for PLC boards, if you're over 70, you must have been appointed. Your appointment must have been approved in a general meeting. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour of what the responsibilities are. But the question is, should I have a board or should my business have a board? By law, yes. So a private limited company must have a minimum of 1 director. A public limited company has a minimum of 2 directors, and all boards of directors need to have at least 1 director who is a natural person, i.e. they're not another company. So you can have other companies as a director. lots of businesses have more than the minimum, but then lots do only have the minimum as well. And I'm guessing we're talking mainly, we'll be talking about private limited companies today. It's good to have a board because the board provides a unique combination of knowledge and expertise in different areas of a business, whether that's finance. I mean, generally you get to see finance and commercial management on a board, and technology and things like that. So having that board can amplify the strengths and address any weaknesses in your organisation. And boards tend to grow organically from the senior management team in the business. But obviously there's all the legal things that the board needs to do, but having a board is certainly much more than just ticking off some compliance issues and making sure that you're legal. I just want to quickly go through what the difference is between an executive director and a non-executive director, because this is often can be confusing if you're not used to being around boards or being in larger corporates that have well-established boards. So the main difference here, the only real difference is the non-exec director is not an official employee, and they're probably not full-time. Well, they won't be full-time, they've been part-time. So under the Companies Act 2006, all directors, both executive and non-executive, are regarded as officers of the company. And company law recognises no distinction between exec director and a non-exec director. So, you know, as a non-exec director, I still have the same risks and opportunities that I would if I was an executive director. But executive directors are by nature working in the business and are concerned with the day-to-day management of the company's business, actually making things happen on a day-to-day basis, whereas non-exec directors, because they aren't generally employees, they tend to be taking a much more strategic view. So they're contributing to the development of business strategy, monitoring the performance of the exec team, making sure they're meeting their objectives, keeping them accountable, making sure that there's robust risk management controls in place. Many businesses have them in place, but a non-exec director is best placed to ensure that they're robust and meeting the needs of the business and the legal requirements. Non-exec directors will verify financial information is accurate. They play a part in succession planning of senior executives in the business, and they also get involved in remuneration discussions. But what is a benefit here is that they tend to act more as a sounding board and have an objective and independent view of the business, of bringing in constructive challenges rather than the challenges of day-to-day running of the business. And they often complement the skills and expertise of the exec team. That's not to say they're filling gaps, and I wouldn't recommend that a non-exec director is entirely put in place to fill a gap, and that we'll talk about advisory boards in a minute. That's more their kind of remit, but from a non-exec director point of view, they can complement the skills that are already there, and then they bring fresh perspectives and to the discussions that are happening on a regular basis within the business. So moving on to what the difference is between a board and an advisory board. So I've sat on a couple of advisory boards, and if you look at this grid here, you think, well, there's not much point in an advisory board because they can't do anything. Well, they can. So whilst they're not a company director, they don't have any legal or fiduciary responsibilities, and they can't vote on company matters or have any formal powers. What an advisory board can do is help you fill those gaps, those skill gaps. So like I said, a non-exec director is not best placed to be brought in just to fill a skill gap. They're supposed to complement it. An advisory board, they're less permanent, and they generally will fill a skill gap, and often they're brought in to help a company navigate a specific opportunity or a challenge. So for example, if a company is looking at raising investment or have a new market they want to enter, this is when an advisory board comes into its own. So I recently sat on an advisory board for a business that was expanding its manufacturing operations, and I had some experience in what they were in the industry they were expanding in. So that's why I was asked to come and sit on that board. it's in its simplest form, an advisory board is a group of subject matter experts. I've also seen other businesses do it where they've, another business I've worked with who are dealing with clean energy, and they wanted scientists that actually were absolute experts in that space to come and sit and advise them on the best route to market. So, for example, they're often industry or academic experts. You do see lots of academics on advisory boards who can provide practical input and direction. And they tend to be in place for shorter periods of time and quite flexible, and they're providing advice and not governance. So that was a quick overview of the differences between boards, advisory boards and non-exec directors. So the next question is, how big should my board be? And that really depends on your current company life stage, your future vision, the size of your company. So if you're a startup or early stage scale-up, you might feel you don't actually need a board and you're doing okay on your own. And often what I come across with solo entrepreneurs is that they feel a board might hold things up, slow them down. But I find it actually quite the contrary. I think having a board in place is can give you a really good perspective and advice on your decisions, plans and processes, helps you delegate tasks out that aren't in your area of expertise, particularly with an advisory board. And as a solo entrepreneur or as a solo founder, you become a bit of a bottleneck in your business because you don't have the time to work on the business. You're just working in the business, you're making the operations happen and everything happen. So a board can really help with that, but you need to be careful how many people you have on that board. Like I said earlier, boards tend to grow organically, but I also know that when you're a small new startup or scale-up business, you won't necessarily want to put in the extra resource to create that board. So I wouldn't. I had a look online to see, what's the best number, what's the optimum number, and what I found was 6 or 7 individuals is the optimum number of exec members, because you might want to add non-exec members on there. Now, I think that's quite high for the kind of businesses that we are talking about today. So I'd probably start with 3, maybe 4. Generally, the founder or the CEO plus a finance specialist, and then an operations specialist or a commercial specialist. So those people might already be in your business, or you may have to potentially get in a part-time director, which is a possibility that people don't always consider, or look at getting a non-exec director in to support that. So I think 3 or 4 is probably about right at the kind of stages of these businesses or the size of the businesses that we've had introduced so far today. So how do I know if I need an executive board, an advisory board, or a non-exec director? Which one should I have? Should I have some of them, a combination of them? So we've looked at the legal requirements. We know that what the minimum is. So now it's about the life stage and projected growth or scale up trajectory or maintenance even of your business. So at Tiger, while we had about 120 team members, which we used to go up to around 200 seasonally at Christmas, and we turned over just over 5 million, we had a very, very small head office team of around 6, I think we were about 6 people. And so we had a very small and informal board, but the reason for that was we knew what our growth trajectory looked like, because we weren't the only partnership in the UK, and we certainly weren't the only global partnership. So we had historical partnerships to look at who had done it before, to see what kind of resource we needed. We didn't have very complex business deliverables, really. They were very consistent. We could replicate them in all our stores. And we reviewed them weekly, because that's what you do in retail. So we only really had myself and my business partner and a member of the Danish parent company on our board, but we used experts in the business and our advisors and the parent company for areas where we were lacking skills as and when were required. So we had a very, very small board. So thinking about how your business is structured and the skill set you have in the business is really important, and what your future holds. So like I said earlier, generally an exec board would probably consist of the most senior personnel in the business, that CEO, COO, finance, sales, those kind of roles. And then you would add a non-exec or a couple of non-execs on top, potentially a chairperson plus a non-exec or two non-execs. I always like to see marketing and HR on a board, but it's not always the norm. Why do I like to see them? Because marketing represents the customer and HR represents the people. And without either of those, you don't have a business. But it's still, I think there's still a long way to go before we start seeing that more regularly certainly on small boards, on smaller business boards. So you do tend to see it a little bit more on larger business boards now, but still a long way to go. If you're looking to make your business investable or saleable, having a strong board with a diverse range of skills is the kind of thing that investors or purchasers are looking for. So those extra skills, the extra experience that the board can bring in, particularly when you bring in non-execs as well, is invaluable, because of an investor will know that you have the strategic guidance, you have the kind of kudos to be able to deliver what you're saying you're going to deliver. And like I said earlier, an advisory board is really coming into its own when there's specific objective or challenge that you're facing and you don't have the internal resource or the internal expertise to deliver that. So like I said, making an acquisition, entering a new market or getting investment or making an acquisition, or I don't know, bringing in a new IT system. Like I said, there was a manufacturing system that I worked on, manufacturing expansion that I worked on recently as well. So I guess the main reason for exec board is to ensure that you've got your day-to-day running of your business is in line with all your legal requirements, and also that you can put the resource and time and effort into creating the strategy to make your business grow. Having an advisory board is when you really don't have the expertise in the business, or it's a short-term project and you don't need to bring in that expertise permanently, and it's very specific. And then a non-exec director can bring in more generalist, high-level strategic skills and experience to help you add even more breadth to your business. So what can I gain from appointing an advisory board? So like I said earlier, it tends to be industry and academic expertise and specialist skills. This is very similar to the kind of benefits that a non-exec director brings, but the length of tenure, like I said, is a bit shorter. It tends to be for a specific amount of time, or you could be kind of trying to take your step up to the next level, but it tends to be under a year or 18 months maximum, really. What's also good from an investor's point of view, particularly, is that you're showing that you're surrounding yourself with the key opinion leaders in the industry that you're working in. So even if it's only a short-term advisory board, the fact that you are willing to bring in those advisors is a real positive. Advisory boards tend to be much more hands-on, so they tend to give much more tactical advice than a non-exec director, and they may even actually deliver some of the work for you. And what's also a positive about advisory board is there are actually people out there who don't want to sit on a board for whatever reason, but having an advisory board which is short-term means that you can attract people who wouldn't permanently want to sit on a board as a non-exec director, don't have the time or the resource to do that, but are really interested in helping you through the pinch point that you need to get through. So what can I gain from appointing a non-exec director? So again, very much, we've talked about it already, but this fresh and impartial perspective. Non-exec directors are there to challenge and question and monitor the senior management team, bring that kind of impartial perspective to decision making, and that's because we're not clouded necessarily by company politics. We have no career ambitions within the business that maybe people on the exec board would have. We're acting in the best interest of the company, and we want to constructively challenge you, but we're also sufficiently distanced from operational activities. We're not in that kind of day-to-day melee that's going on. That means that we're quite well placed to focus on taking that step back and giving a high level perspective on strategy and identifying risks and opportunities in a calm way, that because we're like I said, we're not involved in the day-to-day to-do list, so we can be a bit of more of a voice of reason. And often what I find is that not necessarily all the time, but what I do find sometimes is that directors, particularly people who are growing at a fast rate, can sometimes see it as a criticism. And I always say to the directors I work with, please don't be offended. It could feel like criticism, but genuinely we're coming from a place of wanting to see the best for a business. We're trying to be that critical friend rather than criticizing the decisions you're making. We're giving you the benefit of our experience and our breadth of experience to actually help you. But I know sometimes I've been on the other side of the fence where if anyone questions a decision you've made or a strategy you've put in place, you might see it as a criticism, but it's absolutely not. That's not, certainly for the vast majority of non-exec directors, that's not in our best interest to be criticising you. We want to be supporting you. You can also gain a huge array of contacts from non-exec directors. We know as business leaders that it's time consuming to build up networks and contacts. And as non-exec directors, we can shortcut that by introducing you to people that maybe you may never have come across, or you might not have heard of, or you wouldn't always have access to. And I've done that a few times with my previous non-exec director positions. Commercial experience. So a good non-exec director will have a proven track record, be really experienced. We've been there, we've done it either as entrepreneurs or as senior C-suite execs in large corporates. Having that balance is really important. And having people from around you who have experience outside your business add more depth as well to your exec team. Accountability. We ensure that the board is operating effectively. That's one of our main tasks, is to make sure the board is operating effectively. So we create accountability. And fundraising opportunities and expertise. Like I said, we generally will have big networks, and we're also seen as a really good asset for potential investors. So where can I find candidates for these roles? So obviously there's specialist recruiters out there that come at a cost, but they will know the best ones on the market. They'll know the ones that are suited to the needs that you have in your business, and you will have already identified why you need a non-exec and you know what you want them to bring to the table, or an advisory board and what you want them to do. Traditional job boards. I found my non-exec director role at the Development Bank of Wales through a traditional job board. So they work, people are out there looking, and you know, people like me who want a kind of portfolio of non-exec roles will be looking to keep an eye out on the market to see what's out there. Your own network, have a look around the people that you know already, or ask people in your network. And then also people you admire. And people don't always think about this, businesses don't always think about this, but is there somebody out there that you think, you don't know them, but you'd love them to be involved in your business? Ask them, just ask them. You just never know, you might be surprised. Again, that's happened to me where I've been asked to be involved, just out of the blue, rather than because people have seen me around the kind of business networks and felt that I had the skills and experience that they needed to help them through a specific project. In terms of remuneration, I have done non-exec directorship as voluntarily for a charity, but you can also be paid with remunerated as normal or via equity, or a combination of equity and remuneration. You often hear people talk about sweat equity, where a non-exec director does the work for a piece of equity in the business, and then of course expenses on top of that. With advisory boards, it tends to be more likely to be a day rate, unless you can persuade them to do it out of the goodness of their heart, which sometimes will happen with startups. But yeah, it tends to be a day rate, and which might seem expensive, but because they're temporary, it's actually can sometimes be more cost effective than bringing in those full-time permanent employees or a consultant to do the piece of work, because you're getting more breadth of experience. And then when you're appointing your candidates, make sure that their ambition and values for your business match your ambition and values for your business. And another thing, which, because you do find a lot of people who have a portfolio of non-exec roles, find out, do they genuinely have the time and inclination to spend time on your business? Because often I don't think you can do more than 4 non-exec roles at once. That would, even 4 is a bit of a stretch. But you know, so make sure they've got the time and the resources to commit to the role and the needs that you've identified that person needs to fill. Different slightly with advisory boards because they tend to be, you know, more specific, but particularly with non-exec directors, you know, you need to make sure that you're going to get what you need from them. So how can I work effectively with boards or non-exec directors? I'm just going to keep moving on as I'm conscious of time. So 4 key things that I would say when you're working with your board or your non-exec director: communicate. Keep them informed of any small changes and big changes obviously, but small changes as well, because so you have the full picture as a non-exec director to help you give the best advice and strategy. Think about how you communicate them, when and how often. So for very straightforward updates, an email's fine. I just put all my emails in one place and I'll deal with them as and when I have my morning for dealing with that particular board. Explain more complicated information and discussing alternatives need to be kept for board meetings unless it's an urgent decision that needs making. But having the debate is better in a board meeting, mainly because everybody will be there as well and you're not having to manage various conversations. You may, if you've got a really complex debate that needs to happen at the board meeting, you might want to have pre-board chats with each of the NEDs or the directors separately, so you can just make the discussions a bit smoother on the actual board meeting. And keep to the point when positioning a challenge or opportunity. So what's going right about it, what's good about it, what's wrong or what's not going well, and what you want the board to do. So do you want us to approve a decision, debate it, or give advice? You know, just be clear about, you know, what's going well, what's not so well, what do you want us to help you do? Be open and honest. So often founders particularly are very wary of boards and they feel like maybe they've been forced on them because they have raised investment. And they see them a bit like a head teacher, maybe, but we're not there to hand out detentions or mark your assignments. We're there to help you and support you in maximising the company. So make sure you give us all the information we need. Don't hide things from us, whether that's data or problems. Give us access to the key team members that we might need to, as if we were a CEO. You know, we'd need to see all that information to make decisions as a CEO. So please don't hold that back from us. And ask us for help and let us help you. I often get asked for help, but then actually will the founder actually let me help them? That's a different matter. Don't paint too rosy a picture if it's going to distort any of the actual facts. We can't help you go if we're unaware of the full picture. Plan and prepare. So particularly if you're a founder or of an entrepreneurial mindset, you might just want to get on with running the business, but you might end up then spending too much time on execution and not enough time on strategy. And so give yourself time to plan and prepare for the board meetings and the projects that you're working on. Make sure you've got a strategic plan in the first place, because that forms the basis of your journey. And we know that plans change, you know that your journey is going to go up and down, but you have to have a plan in place to be able to see what's working and what's not, and for us to be able to advise you on what to do next. And, you know, should you turn left instead of right, or go around the roundabout and start again? Have that plan so we can validate it and pull it apart. Think about how you monitor and regularly validate your strategy as well as your tactics and execution. It's really easy to analyse an email campaign or your cost of goods, but make sure you're consistently validating the strategy first, making sure that's correct. And spend as much time on that as you are on analysing the outputs. For advisory boards, be very specific, very clear on what the specific challenges that they're there to address. Be clear on their role and purpose and what you expect from them before appointing them. Like I said, I've already said, be prepared for the board meeting and provide us with accurate background information, and come to us with your potential solutions. Often it's easier to debate and refine a potential solution than it is to actually come up with one, because it's just easier to pull something apart and put it back together than it is to think on our feet. So if we've got potential solutions presented to us, that helps us with our thinking process. And no surprises. Never surprise a board. You could say you could surprise them with good news, but even that I'd rather know about in advance. It's always good to warn of bad news, one-to-one in advance, and good news I'd like to know about in advance as well, because then that helps us actually move forward in that meeting and go, great, this is brilliant news. What can we do with that now? What can we do with that great new deal, or that, that now we've landed that investment, etc. So finally, what can you do next as a business owner, as a CEO, as an MD of a business? Review your current setup. So is it working for you? Does it need a refresh? Do you have everything you need in your current team, or is your team, your board team or your senior team full of people who are too similar? And you need to kind of mix that up a bit. So, do you have that right mix of people to create a variety of solutions and generate diverse ideas or perspectives? Does your team, your senior team, include individuals who can provide mentorship and guidance? Often, you've got a great team full of experience, but are they the right kind of people who can provide that mentorship and guidance? Think about your 5-year plan. So are you going to maintain? Are you going to grow? Are you going to look for investment? Are you looking to exit even? Think about what skills and experience you need to get through each of those gates over the next 5 years. Can that be maximised by an advisory board or non-exec director rather than new team members potentially? If you're looking for investment, like I said, does your board look credible to outsiders, or even to attract top talent? Think about all those things you want to achieve in the next 5 years, and look at what you need in terms of skills, experience, to deliver that. And get an objective view. Speak to somebody like me, or think about the companies that you admire and look at the structures they have in their board, and see if it's something you can replicate on a smaller scale or a similar scale. So, sorry, it's a very whistle stop. I'm conscious I want to leave you time for some questions. So we've only got 5 or 6 minutes, but that's me done. Neil, so if you want to take back, I'll press the stop share. There we go.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, Kate. Yeah, it's a huge topic, and huge. We constantly try to balance with these sessions, keeping them short because we know people's time is short, and also at the moment everyone's attention span is particularly short. We're all zoomed out, so we're taking on big topics and trying to do them in short periods of time. So if you have any questions, pop them in the chat, and I'll read them to Kate. And while we're waiting for questions to come in, Kate, what was the point for you? So I know, I mean, I've been on both sides of the fence here. I've sat as a non-exec, and I've also appointed non-execs. But the thing that I've always struggled with as an entrepreneur is that I'm so busy doing the thing that it feels like so busy trying to grow the company that it feels like too big a
commitment.
Yeah, not even a commitment, just like I know I need to do it, I just don't have the resources, the mental resources to do it. So sometimes it's deciding when is the right time to do that. So for you, I mean, maybe because you're in a partnership, it was clearer, but what has been for most of us, it's when we get investment, that's kind of part of the deal. But was there any point for you where you just went, right, okay, with Tiger, I just absolutely this is the moment where it has to happen?
Yeah, I think so. We started with one store in St David's in the December, but we knew we wanted to grow very quickly. So we started. We opened another 2 stores about 10 months later. So we started to really formalise the way we worked as a team into more of a board perspective very, very quickly, because there was no way we could, like you say, do the day job and think about strategy without creating a framework of how we were going to do that. So whilst we had our accountant who supported us, and the bank as well, we were funded by HSBC, so they worked very closely with us. They were kind of our finance director, and Helen and I had our own sort of, I looked after strategy and finance and commercial, whereas Helen looked after more operations and HR. So we were the kind of two, those we took those on, but we were putting formal meetings in with a formal structure and a formal in a timetable, probably 6-8 months in. But bearing in mind, we went from a standing start to £1 million turnover in about 6 months. So we were going very, very fast. And we needed to have that structure to be able to take us through each of the steps of the growth of the business. So I would say if you're not going as fast as we were, if you're looking to take a big step up, you definitely need to be at least putting structure around your meetings so it feels a bit more like a board meeting, even if you haven't got a formal board in place. If you're looking for investment, you need to seriously think about, if nothing else, identifying who you would have on your board. And that's when non-exec directors or part-time directors come into their own, because you might not be able to afford to have somebody full-time permanent in the business, but you do have the experience and the skill set within your business, be it on a part-time basis. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that I suppose you say having those formalized meetings does help the transition as and when because if I've run small scrappy startups where moving to a board just feels like an alien concept.
Yeah, and you feel like it's going to hold you back because, oh God, I've got to prepare for that. But actually making ourselves do it, having an agenda, having things that we needed to discuss, putting timescales on things was against the nature of being a scrappy startup, but actually gave us the foundations we needed to grow. I'm a big fan of foundations. I've worked with a CEO before. He's like, oh, I don't want to be too big and corporate. And I'm like, well, the fact is you are big and corporate because you're already turning over a few million. So you put those foundations in, it will save you time and allow you to spend the time on the things that are going to grow the business.
Okay, great. Andrew has asked, how do you deal with the challenge of ensuring that a new or first-time board keeps the conversation strategic and moving from constant operational issues?
Yeah, again, that's about, so we used to have operational meetings on a Monday, and we kept all the operational stuff from then. And then the kind of more board strategic meetings, we made sure our agenda was tight around strategic discussions, and we made sure there was somebody in place who didn't allow us to go off on tangents, because it is very easy, isn't it, to get very caught up in the day-to-day rather than the higher level. So actually having somebody who went hello, which was generally me, because I was a strategist, I'm a marketing strategist, so that's kind of my sweet spot. But having somebody who says, right, we're going off tangent a bit, let's car park it, let's put a piece of paper up that says we'll come back to that at next week's ops meeting, rather than debate it now. It's hard work. It takes a little bit of practice, but
practice and discipline. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Val, who works in private equity, has asked about day rates for non-execs. I don't know if that's a how long is a piece of string question, but is there, obviously, if you have any insight there, that'd be useful.
Yeah, it all depends on the size of the business, where the business is. London, you're going to get a lot more. Although these days you can be a lot more virtual about it. Financial services and big PLCs pay a lot more. it's a little bit how long is a piece of string. I've seen everything from £50 an hour to £1,500 a day. You know, it really depends. And I think, you know, if you need to be upfront about what your budget is, and there's no reason why as a business owner you can't have a budget in mind and see what you're going to get for that. Because I've done it for a very low budget just because I really loved the business and thought it was amazing business, and I felt I could really help them develop. And so that was my own, and there's a sense of achievement for me out of that. It's not always just about the money, and I would think twice about the non-execs who are all about the money. I mean, obviously you've still got to have, we've still got to make a living, but you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There was I did an advisory thing for a startup a while back, and it was I think I was charging them £100 a month for one 45-minute call a week or something, and it was it was because I believed in them, and I think that's a valuable thing to do. A quick question about Development Bank of Wales, and obviously, so do you? So you mentioned actually in one of your early slides that you can either be an employee, not an employee, but also you mentioned that a business can be a board director. So that would be where, for example, DevBank would assign someone to sit on your board. You know, I've got lots of friends who've had DevBank.
Tend to be observers.
Yes.
So.
Is that the same thing?
Yeah.
And how does that normally work?
Yeah. I've seen it more with VC venture capitalists, where they will assign a board member on behalf of that company. They assign. So you tend to see it more with venture capitalists. And what you find once you get into investment and things like that, the investors will often ask for a seat on the board. It's a hard one, but sometimes it's part and parcel of the terms of the investment, because sometimes having too many, if you've got a lot of investors, then having them all on the board just makes it a chatting board, not a doing board. It tends to be what you see observers.
Okay, and so how? And you're doing that now for DevBank. What does that look like for, you know, because I know that I think certainly within the tech startup world that I tend to operate in, there's a little bit of kickback against DevBank board members subconsciously, just because it feels like they're going to do the typical thing of be the overly safe, risk averse kind of board member.
Yeah.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'm actually a non-exec director of the Development Bank of Wales, so I'm on the main board. But I do sit on the board of one of their invested companies, partly because I'm a small investor in them. So it's not in whether it's Development Bank or any investors' best interest to be the conservative one necessarily. Obviously, you've got to be conservative when it comes to legal obligations, or if the business is just running off on a tangent. But I certainly, and I know what you're saying. You know, I've actually was in. We have money from Finance Wales as well in Tiger, so I know that you often get the impression that they're there to say no rather than to say yes. That's not the case at all, and certainly what I've seen of Development Bank of Wales since it's moved on from Finance Wales is that it's very much a supportive network now, from what I've seen with the company that I work with as well, Loopster. So, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, you know, sometimes people see non-exec directors as critics, but I think what you've got to be aware of is that we have experience, we have seen a lot of things happen. We are more objective because we're not in the day-to-day of the business. We're not there to try and reduce your business growth. We're there to maximize your business growth, but we're also there to kind of almost be mum a little bit and go, just be careful, or, you know, or have you thought about it this way instead, you know, and to try and make sure that you're being the most efficient and effective and resourceful that you can be. It can sometimes feel that we're being a bit more negative. I hope not. I try not to be. I try to be That's half full about everything.
Good. And so we'll take this one last question then,
Okay.
and then we'll wrap up. So Andrew asked, merits of being a non-exec, being a board chair.
Oh, merits of being a non-exec versus being a board chair.
I think it's the question is merits of a non-exec being the board chair.
Oh, I see. Sorry. Yes, I would always prefer that. Again, it's that idea of objectivity, of not being in the day-to-day melee of what's going on, being able to see the wood for the trees, as it were. I would always advocate for a non-exec to be a chair.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'll tell you what I'll do before we wrap up, as promised. If this allows me to actually do it, it's not going to allow me to do it. I was just going to post the links to upcoming events in the chat. And is that going to work? There we go. So for those of you who don't receive our weekly updates, there's a link there where you can sign up, and all upcoming events. We only have one actually upcoming at the moment. We'll have several more booked in over the following week. You can always keep an eye on that. So yeah, some thanks coming in the chat. Thank you everyone for attending. If you have any questions, you can reach out. I'm going to pop mine and Kate's contact details in the screen again. Any questions, reach out. Obviously, if you wanted to have a quick one-to-one with Kate, you're welcome to drop her an email. If you have any suggestions or feedback, then obviously email me. And thank you. That's Kate, first and foremost, thank you primarily to you for your great insight. It was really particularly, obviously, lovely to chat to you at the end and get a bit more insight about your personal experience. So, yeah, thanks everyone. And Kate, if you stick around for a few seconds, everyone else, class dismissed. And yeah, hopefully see you at the next event. Thanks, folks. Take care.